Over the weekend, a number of buses carrying migrants who'd recently crossed the U.S. southern border were headed to New York.
As the city and state head for a high-stakes court battle tomorrow over the right to shelter, more migrants are arriving, putting more stress on an overtaxed system.
Immigration reform. Immigration reform is an issue that the mayor is discussing on a federal level.
Overwhelmed at the southern border. So far, each day this week, Border Patrol has processed more than 10,000 migrants.
Is in the midst of an unprecedented migrant crisis. Asylum seekers are making their way here in record numbers.
Canceling the game. At a public field in East Harlem, a high school soccer match was called off because a group of migrants wouldn't vacate the field so the students couldn't play. Eric Johansson, the coach of the Manhattan Kickers, a 17-year-old boys travel team, said, "I asked them to leave and some of them kind of took it into consideration, but then 4 or 5 of them said, you know what? F it. We don't have to leave. We can do whatever we want." For the 5 p.m. match on Sunday, April 14th, at Thomas Jefferson Park, about 40 lads from both teams turned up. The Kickers and FA Euro New York were scheduled to play. However, despite the arrival of the police, a group of around 30 guys who seemed to be African migrants and spoke little English refused to leave. The police demanded to see a copy of the club team's city permit in order to end the altercation. Usually, no one asks to see your permit when you show up with 2 teams in uniform, a referee, and 2 coaches, Johansson added. When Johansson's assistant managed to send over a copy of the Kickers' permit, the game was 30 minutes behind schedule and neither team felt comfortable. Even if the cops forced them out, it could not be over, since you never know if they're waiting for you when the game ends. Mother of a player on the squad from Soho, Maud Marin, told the Post, "It's so frustrating that the guys who refuse to follow the rules won." The kids were given that message. It is a symptom that the Big Apple is getting lawless, according to her. Parkgoers said that teams of adults are vying for weekend turf time at the East Harlem field. On the other side of the Harlem River, on Randall's Island, 2,000 migrants were housed last year, taking up space that was formerly used for the well-liked youth soccer grounds. Broken immigration system. Over 170,000 migrants have arrived in New York City since 2022. The majority were transported there by bus from the U.S.-Mexico border by Texas authorities. Many of them are South American nationals seeking refuge who are fleeing political and economic instability in places like El Salvador and Venezuela. However, a growing number of individuals from the Caribbean, Western Africa, and Asia are also making the arduous trek to the United States through the southern border. In the contrast to other purported sanctuary cities, New York is required by law to give sanctuary to anybody who requests it. This requirement is referred to as a consent decree.
Over the weekend, a number of buses carrying migrants who'd recently crossed the U.S. southern border were headed to New York.
Well, now to our series, Migrants in America. Tonight, a closer look at the West African population that's arriving here in New York City.
It's the most recent effort by officials to manage a crisis that's seen hundreds of thousands of migrants arrive in northern cities.
Overwhelmed at the southern border. So far, each day this week, Border Patrol has processed more than 10,000 migrants.
However, the system is finding it difficult to handle the influx of so many individuals due to its already inadequate funding and resources. The city modified its policy in October to mandate that all individuals in the shelter system reapply for a bed every 30 to 60 days, which further compounded the confusion. The volatility can have disastrous effects on asylum seekers, who are already attempting to navigate complex legal and healthcare systems. Because of this, grassroots activists like Ilza Thielman of Team TLC, Adama Ba of Africana, and Power Malu of Artists, Athletes, Activists have been filing in a significant void in the city's immigration system by welcoming newcomers, directing them to resources, and giving them food and clothing. Most importantly, they assist individuals in comprehending their rights and submitting asylum applications in order to obtain work permits and secure long-term housing. Speaking from the front lines of this catastrophe, the organizers claim that even with $1.45 billion spent on migrant costs alone in 2023, the city is inadequately providing for the needs of the migrants coming here. The illusion is that they're in these beautiful hotels and they're getting all of these services, and it's not true. Malu asserts. That's why you have organizations like ours that have stepped up and had to change from welcoming to now doing case management, social services, and helping them with mental health therapy. In order to have a better understanding of the situation on the ground, how the present issue, which is receiving a lot of national attention, is handled on a daily basis.
More than 160,000 to New York alone since the spring of 2022.
Is in the midst of an unprecedented migrant crisis. Asylum seekers are making their way here in record numbers.
As the city and state head for a high-stakes court battle tomorrow over the right to shelter, more migrants are arriving, putting more stress on an overtaxed system.
And whether the city could be doing more to assist. G0's Alex Clement spent time working with recently arrived asylum seekers and the volunteers. G0 has requested a response from City Hall and will provide an update upon receiving it. New York facing problems. New York City has experienced a surge in migrants and asylum seekers since spring 2022, with over 118,000 arriving after crossing the US-Mexico border. This surge has strained city services as migrants arrive with few resources and have had to rely on the city's shelter system to a degree not seen in the past. As of September, nearly 60,000 newly arrived migrants were living in the city's shelters, about two-thirds of them families with children. Their sheer numbers have placed enormous fiscal pressure on New York City, costing it over $1 billion so far and prompted officials to declare a state of emergency. Some estimates say the cost of housing could surpass $4.3 billion by July 2024. While this is a significant amount, it would account for less than 5% of New York's budget in fiscal year 2022. Legal services for asylum seekers are also stretched thin. Anyone applying for asylum must wait a minimum of 6 months before receiving a work permit. Many recently arrived migrants are unable to find a lawyer to help them start the asylum application process, or are already undergoing the process but unable to work legally. Cities including Chicago, El Paso, Texas, and San Diego have also seen an increase in their migrant populations, though not to the scale of New York City. Within Latin America, several push factors drive migrants north. First, the well-known crisis. The implosion of Venezuela's economy under the authoritarian rule of President Nicolas Maduro. The lingering effects of Haiti's 2010 earthquake, coupled with the country's ongoing gang warfare, troubles that have pushed close to 2 million Haitians to flee the country, and the deepening dysfunction of Cuba's economy, which is responsible for the outflow of 1 million migrants and refugees from the island. The ordinary dysfunction of poorly functioning market economies and states, such as inequality and hunger in southern Mexico and northern Central America, surging criminal violence, particularly in Ecuador, and climate change-related disasters. The majority of Latin American migrants have resettled within the region.
While some people welcome the new arrivals, others are having a hard time accepting the influx of migrants.
Immigration reform. Immigration reform is an issue that the mayor is discussing on a federal level.
Is that this city has a long-standing tradition of offering shelter to anyone who requires it.
Although a growing number of them are now heading for the United States due to the scarcity of economic opportunities. The U.S. Congress is the only institution that can provide long-term solutions by changing migration legislation. For one, Congress could reduce the period of time that asylum seekers must wait between beginning the asylum process and applying for a work permit. Another dilemma is that the Department of Homeland Security's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services does not have sufficient staff to clear the backlog of work authorization cases, leaving migrants waiting up to 20 months for documents whether they are seeking asylum or not. U.S. political divisions impeding a solution include Republican lawmakers accusing Democrats of facilitating open borders and Republican governors of Florida and Texas spending millions of dollars to bus migrants and asylum seekers to Democrat-led northern cities, including Washington, D.C., as part of a political messaging stunt. Ironically, the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border has become an excuse to avoid taking action toward a compromise that could make the U.S. immigration system less dysfunctional. As the 2024 presidential election nears, Republicans have even less incentive to contribute to a solution. A border in chaos is good optics for rallying voters against the incumbent party. But simply toughening up border enforcement is not a solution, at least based on the Donald Trump administration's track record. Despite employing a brutal deterrence campaign, migrants and asylum seekers fleeing desperate conditions continued arriving at the southern U.S. border in large numbers. Moving forward, the United States needs comprehensive immigration reform that expands legal pathways for migrants to enter the country. Because there are so few pathways currently, many people view making asylum claims, however unlikely they are to succeed, as their only option, effectively breaking the system. On foreign policy, lending institutions such as the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation need more flexible rules so they can prioritize middle-income countries, such as those in Latin America, that are struggling to integrate refugees and asylum seekers into their economies. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.